All right, this video is looking at the second part of language. So in the last video, I talked about how we develop language and Skinner and Chomsky's theories about language. And so we talked about Skinner is more nurture-oriented and believing that everything is based off from what is reinforced, and Chomsky believed in nature. So a couple of last things with how we develop language. First of all, there seems to be this critical period of language that kids must be exposed to some sort of language by the age of 7. That was always believed to be the case for a really long time, and it has been tested over time, unfortunately, by observing kids that have had really extreme cases of neglect. And I got an example for you later. Uh, After this time, even a second language is harder. So they often say that if you are learning a second language or you want your child to learn a second language, it's best to go and have them be immersed in it initially as they're growing up. I know several people that have done this and to varying degrees of success. My husband and I have a friend, for example, who is married to a woman from Brazil, and they just had a baby. And he was telling us that their plan is that when his wife goes back to work, they plan on hiring a nanny from Brazil for the express purpose of having another person in the house that will speak Portuguese around this baby, because our friend doesn't speak Portuguese. But I've also had another example recently where another friend who is ironically enough also from Brazil, and her son, who is 7, has been she's been trying to immerse him in the language at home, but she hasn't had a whole lot of success. He understands some Portuguese, but not enough, not a lot, and she doesn't feel that he's really fluent in it. So you will find now as high school students that you're taking a second language now, and it's probably a lot harder now than it would have been if maybe you would have had a second language maybe in, for example, elementary school. So that's definitely the case. This is a chart that is also interesting. This shows the grammatical proficiency. My little thing's going away. It shows the grammatical proficiency on the x-axis or the y-axis, and on the x-axis is the age of acquisition of a second language. So it's interesting because a native speaker obviously is very high in proficiency in actually speaking the language. If you learn when between 1 and 7, your grammatical proficiency is that of a native speaker. It's the same thing. As you learn later in life, and as you learn when you're a little older, your proficiency drops off to the point of this is 17 to 39-year-olds that will learn a second language. And it's interesting because obviously the grammatical proficiency drops off significantly compared to if they learned it when they were a little earlier. If not exposed to a language during this critical period, however, kids will be always linguistically behind. As I said, sometimes there are some extreme examples and cases like this. Case in point is a little girl by the name of Jeannie. She was found in the 1970s. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but she was living in California. She lived with her mother, her father, and an older brother. And she was found because the father was the one that was oppressive. He basically instructed his wife and his son that when interacting with Jeannie, they were not allowed to speak to her at all. Jeannie was kept in one room of the house. All the windows were blocked off by shades. No light was in. Jeannie was constantly, if she was not asleep, she was constantly handcuffed to one of those little toddler potty seats. When they found her, she was 13 years old and she was the size of an 8-year-old. She was not able to speak at all. Obviously, she had no control over her bodily functions. And researchers obviously were astounded, and everyone was very upset by this case. But researchers were wondering, and they said, well, this might finally kind of once and for all solve that issue of, is there a critical period for language? She had not been exposed to language her entire life. She did not speak at all. And so the researchers, I watched a video on it recently, and the researchers talked about her being almost like an infant and taking her out into the world. And just like when you take out an infant into the world and you go and show an infant around, you say, look, tree, bird, car. And it was just like that, and she was 13, and she was amazed and delighted, and she loved it, and she picked up words quickly, very quickly, and they were amazed, and they said, well, maybe there is no critical period of language. She's, speeding right along. But eventually, sadly enough, she did level off in her language acquisition. Um, she uh, she never really got to where she should be. Um, to this day, her language is stunted. Um, Personally, her father, who was the initial instigator, who was being brought up on charges of child abuse neglect, he actually committed suicide before his trial. The mother did go to prison for a time period, I do know that, and then she got out, was released, and she petitioned because for a while Jeannie was awarded the state, and she was for a while living with some of the researchers, and the mother petitioned and argued that Jeannie should live with her. So some judge decided that that would be a great idea, and they went and placed Jeannie back with her mother. That didn't last very long, and then Jeannie went and became a ward of the state. And sadly enough, still to this day, lives in a adult assisted living facility in the state of California. She's not able to support herself. Obviously, her communication skills are not there. As far as I know, I mean, I've seen video of her running around, but I have not actually seen video of her talking. So I'm not aware of that. But she's still, unfortunately, kind of in limbo, and still obviously very, very much affected by what happened to her as a small child. So the point of the story of Jeannie is to illustrate that there is that critical period of language. Okay, moving on to happier things. Talking about your brain on language. How does your brain actually use language? So first, when you read words, many parts of your brain are actually activated when you're reading words. The first part of your brain that's activated is the visual cortex. So as you're reading this, okay, the information is going through the parts of your eye. We already talked about parts of the eye, and is going to the back of your brain where the visual cortex is. So remember, the visual cortex is this green part here, this small part at the very back of your brain. And it goes to the visual cortex, and then it gets sent on to the angular gyrus. And the angular gyrus is this kind of light purple section right here. And the angular gyrus will transform that visual information into auditory information. So you can think of it as when you're reading, okay, when you're reading these words, the first visual cortex receive words, okay. That information is being received in your visual cortex, and then when it goes to your angular gyrus, you have that little voice inside your head, right? That's reading it to you. Okay? You're not reading it out loud, but it's reading it to you. The angular gyrus is actually taking that visual information and turning it into auditory information. So it's kind of reading it to you. Kind of think of that. Okay? And then it's passed on to what they call Wernicke's area. And Wernicke's area is this little orange area right here. We're kind of moving from the back towards the front. And Wernicke's area is in the left temporal lobe. And Wernicke's area is what allows you to actually comprehend language. So as you're reading this sentence, you're able to understand it because of Wernicke's area. After Wernicke's area, then you go to Broca's area. And Broca's area is this kind of light blue area right here. So we're skipping the motor cortex. So we're going from here to here to here to here. And Broca's area is in the left frontal lobe, and it controls the muscles involved in actually speaking what you read. So Broca's area will be the part that will allow you to actually speak what you read. So you can kind of think of if Wernicke's area was broken, you had damage to Wernicke's area, you would not be able to understand words that were on the page or words that other people were saying. If Broca's area was broken or damaged, you wouldn't be able to speak like logical, you wouldn't be able to actually speak words. You make sounds, but, and you'd be able to understand what you were saying, but nobody else would because you basically be speaking gibberish. So after Broca's area, then the motor cortex is then activated by Broca's area, and the motor cortex will actually say the word, will actually read the word. So you go from the visual cortex to the angular gyrus to Wernicke's area to Broca's area to the motor cortex. And also keep in mind that there are different neural networks that are activated by nouns and verbs. So there are going to be different parts that are kind of highlighted when you are speaking nouns versus when you're speaking verbs, as well as if you're speaking in a native language versus a second language. So it's different parts of the brain that are actually being activated. Okay, so keep in mind that the AP test loves their biology. So I know some of you are not a fan, but I would suggest that you do know how language is actually processed in the brain. All right, let me know if you have any questions.